President Bush, to his credit, tried to talk about personal accounts and Social Security, and he was demagogue, and he didn't do a very good job of explaining it. And well, it was Karl Rove didn't do a very good job, but the way they tried to sell it was to scare people, which is a Rovian specialty. And you know, we had all these unfunded liabilities, we had insolvency dates, we had rates of return. People's eyes were glazing over. The way to sell Social Security privatization or personal accounts is two things: ownership and inheritability. If we did the poll through Zogby after the collapse of Bush's efforts and said, do you think people should be able to own the money they pay into Social Security and therefore leave it to their loved ones, whatever's in their account, should they pass away? And something like 82% of people said yes. But that's what personal accounts is all about. And then the third way to sell it is choice. If, as Pinheiro likes to put it, you are genetically socialist, you can stay in this system, this unfunded system. But you're paying into it. People think that they have accounts. There are no accounts. The money is spent with general revenues as soon as it's paid in. So that would have been the way to sell it. But the interesting thing is we have a $20 trillion unfunded liability in Social Security. If at the beginning of the program, which never should have been started in the first place, you had chimpanzees throwing darts at the Wall Street Journal, you would today have a massive surplus in Social Security. So the opponents and demagogues say, oh, the risks of the private sector, the market, oh no. The risk is when you let politicians have the money. That's the risk. When we first published a book in 1980 called Social Security, The Inherent Contradiction by Peter Ferrara, it was the first major study calling for private accounts and pointing out the unsustainability of the pay-as-you-go system, which is so dependent on demographics. The Dow is at under 1,000. It's 12,000 now, and there's been inflation, and there's going to be more. But nevertheless, we've had plenty of opportunities, and there's still opportunities to do this. But I digress. So we're having these debates, and Obama says, no, we're taking all the entitlement things off the table. And I must say that Paul Ryan is a real hero in this stuff, I think. He didn't touch Social Security either. And there are two easy ways, people say, to fix Social Security in the short term anyway. One is to increase the retirement age, which seems logical. People are living 10, 15 years longer than when Social Security was started. And the other thing would be, people have always said, switch from wage increases for the adjustments, payment adjustments, to the CPI, which historically the CPI has been lower than wages. I'm not so sure that's going to be the case in the future. I mean, you've got QE2 going on, and the other, the QE3, quantitative easing, i.e. printing money. It seems to me there's an easy way to foresee how that is going to happen, because California, Illinois, New York, Connecticut are broke, and they're bankrupt. And they're going to go to Congress and say, you got to help us out. We can't, we can't borrow any money. We can't do anything anymore, which is fine with me, of course. But they, this Congress we have, the House, will say, well, sorry, you get your fiscal house in order. We have pretty good people in the House of Representatives now. But what will happen is Ben Bernanke will overhear this conversation and say, you know what? I think we can help you out here. We will print up some money and buy your debt. And then you're going to see inflation in a big way. And I wouldn't be surprised if the CPI is going to rise faster than wages. So maybe the rules should be whichever is lower, CPI or wages. But you take that off the table, and then you start talking about what you're going to cut. And it's been not a very pretty sight to see what the GOP has been doing. Speaker Boehner was on one of the shows just at the beginning of this whole thing, the Sunday shows, and they said, well, what would you cut? What specifically would you cut? Can you think of any departments or agencies or major programs you'd eliminate. And the Speaker of the House, that is supposed to deal with a $1.6 trillion deficit, his immediate answer was not off the top of my head. And he's only been in Congress 20 years. I would expect him to have any ideas in that regard. And as I say, Congressman Ryan, who I admire tremendously, is a good friend of the Cato Institute, he too is not naming names. And at some point, this debate is not about spending in the abstract. It's about what the proper role of government is. Somebody has to stand up and say, you know what, we can save money by getting out of this business here. And I'm a big Milton Friedman fan. He was a dear friend and one of the great humans who ever lived. But Milton always used to say that the Republicans focus too much on taxes. The true tax on the American people is the level of spending. It is the resources extracted from the private sector and employed in the public sector. That is the burden on the private sector. And whether it's direct taxation, borrowing, or inflation, it's increasing the burden. So you should focus on spending. And spending, to focus on spending, you can't just say 10% across the board. That's not an argument for limited government. I've always had this thing with my supply side friends, and I consider myself a supply sider in the sense that I think marginal tax rates matter and incentives matter in terms of economic growth. But Jude Wanniski was kind of the intellectual guru of the supply siders, and he was a big government Democrat. To his credit, he admitted it. But he just wanted the economy to grow so the government would have more money. And he convinced Jack Kemp and Art Laffer and others that, you know, we really shouldn't talk about spending. That's a sucker's game. Let's just grow the economy. And what happened, and we have the Club for Growth, one of the best groups. What happened, I think, is that our side got tricked into focusing on growth as opposed to liberty. Politics is about man's relationship to the state, and you want to minimize that relationship. You want liberty. You want the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happily, there will be economic growth if you have a free society. But to focus on economic growth is A, uninspiring, and B, makes you very flabby in your ability to defend limited government. Now, off the top of his head, Boehner couldn't come up with anything. Off the top of my head, $100 billion we're spending, that is going to be spent by the Department of Education, created by crazy Jim Carter back in the 70s. There was nothing, and then the spending goes up like this, up to $100 billion. And then you plot on the same graph test scores of our kids, and it's flat. And this is, you know, allowing for all the kinds of adjustments you might make to make sure it's your apples and apples. At some point, can't you say, you know, this doesn't look like it's working. Why do we have to throw more money at it? And the fact that the word education is not to be found in the United States Constitution. I mean, Reagan really got elected president in 1980 on a platform that said basically that. It's not the federal government's responsibility. So if you don't take a principled stand, if you don't take a constitutional stand, at least take an empirical stand. It doesn't work. Stop spending the money. Abolish the Department of Education. You can abolish HUD, $63 billion. HUD is just part of this massive effort to get every American to be a homeowner. You know, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, HUD, Community Reinvestment Act, created what the Austrian economists call a massive malinvestment, and trillions and trillions of dollars. That's why some of my friends say, well, Obama's going to win for sure because the economy is bound to bounce back in 2012. I'm not so sure. I think we've really got ourselves in a heck of a mess now, and it's going to take a long time to get out of it. Of course, Congress is still busily trying to prop up the housing market. And unfortunately, what we need is kind of a long period of no new houses, which is not, you know, housing creates jobs, hammers and all that kind of stuff. But it's going to be a long time coming. And HUD added to the problem, saved $63 billion, saved $30 billion by getting rid of farm subsidies, which mostly go to giant agribusinesses. $20 billion simply by adjusting federal salaries to the private sector levels of salaries. It's absurd, and it actually is more true at the state and local level now, as the Yankee Institute has pointed out here. Ridiculous premiums for government workers, many of whom shouldn't be in jobs. Finally, I would say, and this doesn't always go very well with some of my conservative audiences, but I think there's a difference between defense spending and military spending. This is the 50th anniversary of Dwight Eisenhower's speech where he admonished us to be careful about the military-industrial complex. And I think it's important to have some humility when dealing in foreign affairs, that the Pentagon is a bureaucracy like HUD is, and everything they want should not just be, well, we got to do that and more. The driving force in the military budget are the military missions, which are driven by foreign policy, the State Department. And I think these missions have gotten completely out of hand. The Cato Institute opposed the war in Iraq. We favored the first war in Afghanistan to get the Taliban and those SOBs out. But the prolonged 100,000 troops in Afghanistan makes no sense at all. I can't imagine having a kid over there who was just target practice. When our troops come home, Afghanistan's going to be the same hellhole it was before. And why risk our lives and treasure for that? And then, of course, the president's bombing Libya, and not quite sure why. Certainly didn't ask Congress what they thought of it. So the abuse of executive power is going on. All these things in the military area could save hundreds of billions of dollars. I want the strongest possible high-tech defense imaginable, and we do now spend more money than the rest of the world combined on the military. We don't need to spend as much as we do, in my opinion. So, with that kind of is my summary of where we stand. There's when I went to your website, it's a very good website, the Yankee Institute has. I saw my picture and clicked on it, actually. And there, all of a sudden, I see me giving a speech in Florida about a month ago. And I thought, oh, this is nice. They're going to hear my speech before I give my speech. And, but at the end of it, no, there's a line there that's the best line in the speech, and it turned out it was, I'm going to end with a quote from Voltaire because quoting Voltaire makes you sound educated. And, but I'm not going to say that today. I'm going to quote Voltaire. This is in the 1600s, smart guy. So long as the people do not care to exercise their freedom, those who wish to tyrannize will do so. For tyrants are active and ardent, and will devote themselves in the name of any number of gods, religious and otherwise, to put shackles upon sleeping men. I don't think Americans are sleeping anymore. I think the Tea Party has been organized and is waking people up. I think the work of groups like the Cato Institute and the Yankee Institute play a critical role in making sure that nobody is putting shackles on us. And I admire you for helping Yankee, and I know a lot of you helped Cato, so thank you very much.